All right, cool. So I think we're going to get started. A lot of times when I do these talks, I'll do them exclusive for my paying members and clients, but I felt like this was such a rare opportunity and such a great opportunity to reach people that actually need to hear this message that I made it a little bit more public. So there's a few people that I don't recognize here. So let me just allow myself to introduce myself. My name is Paul C. Tijerina. I'm a functional nutritional therapist, master health coach, been coaching over 10 years. I love my freaking life, love working with people. And that's all I got for me. So if you want to learn more about me, you can go to superhumantransformation.com, plug in your email, and I can communicate directly with you. All right. So now allow me to introduce my guest today, Lierre Keith. I am just absolutely starstruck, adore her. She is the author of The Vegetarian Myth, Food Justice and Sustainability, published in 2009. And it's a very science-based, heavily referenced book, and it has a lot of heart and a lot of compassion. It was one of my required readings when I went through nutritional therapy school.
Oh, wow.
When I first started my journey, Weston A. Price, nutritional therapy, it was
Sure.
such a game changer.
Aw.
And I've read it, like I told you, like 6, 8 times. I reference it, recommend it to my clients, especially anyone that's coming to me for advice on kind of plant-based or vegan or something like that. So I'm excited for you to share your story, but Lierre is a 20 plus year ex-vegan, just a heroine type story. I absolutely love it. Kind of extreme, although it represents what a lot of us have been through, if we've
Yeah.
tried to go vegan for a little bit. And another reason I adore you is because you remind me of myself in that you got like this perfect blend of spunk, and you're like a maverick and a rebel and for the things that you believe in, and you're
Yeah.
very confident spoken, and at the same time you can see a lot of compassion and love for humanity and this planet, especially like after reading Bright Green Lines. I'm just like, I'm just blown away by so much of it. So my intention for today is really to provide some education, motivation, inspiration for anyone, everyone, even people considering going this direction, because make no mistake about it, I feel like this is kind of a cautionary tale.
Yeah.
But there's maybe smarter ways to do it. But also, if you're one of my people or someone that's kind of omnivorous or animal based, it will give you a little bit more confidence and a little more education so you can speak intelligently about some of these things that we'll talk about. So was that okay for an introduction?
That's great. That's great.
Okay.
And this was Christabel, the Great Pyrenees.
Oh yeah, and she's got like 4 Pyrenees in there that may just end up making some cameos as we're going
As long
through
as they
this.
don't bark, we're good. Sometimes they interrupt the interview because they have to bark, but hopefully
Hey,
not.
I don't think
Um,
anybody has any problems with animals being on call. So
okay.
how about, and I know that you probably start with this with every conversation that you have, interview, right? Like, can we start with your story? And
Sure.
I don't know that I've ever heard you talk about your childhood and how you ate and what the family dynamic was,
Hmm.
or was there a belief system around that? And then
Sure, sure.
what led you to your decision to go vegan, and then what that experience was like. Can we start there? Is that okay?
Sure. So I grew up in a fairly suburban urban environment just outside a big city. And we ate just sort of standard American diet. My mother was not particularly interested in buying us sugary junk. So I think we had a lot less of that than other kids.
Hmm.
Like we never had soda. We didn't have candy bars lying around. So I guess it could have been worse. But I mean, she certainly had never been told principles of basic, the human template and what it needs. And, at that point in the culture, it was all fairly processed foods, were sort of the norm. But, she was, I think, given her background, the amount of knowledge she did have, I think she was fairly sensible about it. So, like I said, it could have been worse. Like, I'm actually glad I didn't get soda. Of course, at the time when you're a kid, you feel so deprived because
Yeah.
all the other kids are eating soda and they're eating potato chips and they're eating little cheese puff thing, whatever. And like, we didn't have any of that. So,
Having all
um,
that stuff in their lunchbox, and yeah,
yeah, and we didn't. We got an apple, and it was like, ugh, we got an
yeah,
apple.
yeah,
I'm really glad looking back. That's not real deprivation. It just feels like it.
yeah.
So all of that was going on. And then I was just always one of those, even as a very young child, I knew I was here for a purpose and I knew what it was, and nobody was going to stop me. And I could see that the world was being destroyed. I was terrified for the future. I couldn't stand what humans had done in terms of, I looked outside the window and it just everything's covered in concrete.
I was
And
going to say, what was it at that age that you saw that made you feel that way? So it was like just the modernization,
all of
the
it,
urban,
just
yeah,
cars, cities, roads, houses, all of it. I wanted the forest, I wanted the trees, and I wanted wolves. And I had never seen a wolf. I knew they existed and I wanted them back, was all I could tell you. So, and I loved watching, like, all that. We didn't have Animal Planet back then. We didn't even have cable back then. We just had TV. But, we had Wild Kingdom, Mutual of Omaha,
Yeah.
Wild Kingdom. Some of
Again,
you
you
know what I'm
sound just
talking
like
about.
me. Yeah.
It was
Oh my
great.
gosh.
And so
Yeah.
we would watch that. And that was like amazing because you get to see all the wild animals doing their things. But that was as good as it got, really. Because then we'd go to the zoo once in a while, but it was so sad. I mean, those animals were really miserable. And I didn't really have language for that, but that was awful, even though like I really liked being with the animals. Like these were not happy animals.
Yeah. Yeah.
So like
So
what
this
else
was the
is there?
precursor, right? Because you developed a compassion for animals at such a young age,
I mean, really all I had was squirrels. That was pretty much what I saw. So I thought squirrels were great. And at one point when I was, I don't know, maybe 6, 7, 8, I was like, I could be a squirrel. That would be a good animal because they seemed very self-sufficient. And also nobody ever caught them. Like they could just run from anything. Like you just saw them like boom, 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 and then up a tree and down and around. I was like, be a pretty good life to be a squirrel, I think. I think
Yeah,
like
I
I saw a
remember.
rabbit once when I was a kid. Like, that was the extent of it. Like there's nothing left, humans have destroyed it all. So,
I
and
remember you
I'm
saying there
more,
was a story where you and was it your brother? You said you're going to buy a
yeah.
mountain,
What we wanted to do was buy the mountain and then
and
just
then you're
let them
going to invite
wild.
squirrels, and that was it.
That was all we knew.
So,
It was like, okay, squirrels can live there. I was like, what else is there? There's got to be more. But that was really, in the moment, that was all we could think of because it was all we had seen was like squirrels. Okay, squirrels will live there. So yeah, I always felt this incredible loss about the wild and where had it gone, because the world shouldn't look like it did, but it seemed so overwhelming. I mean, just miles and miles and miles, and then continents after continents. So like, where is there any wild left? And why did humans destroy it all? That was always the question. Like, how did we get from here to there? Why is it so bad? So all that was, very, very much at the front of my mind, always. I was just one of those kids. And also, I mean, you can sort of laugh about it. I was like hypersensitive to everything. And like my mother used to say, it was like I had an extra set of nerves. Like everything was just too much sometimes. And I actually remember going into like the closet and shutting the door just for like, it would be dark and quiet because everything out there was too much. So I'm sure some of you can relate, but there's definitely, they talk about HSPs, the highly sensitive people. Like I can relate to that, some of that stuff. So anyway, life moves on. And I always had I wanted to answer that question. Like, why did humans do this? When did it start? What is this about? Why are we wrecking our one and only planet? That was always in the forefront of my mind. So I don't know, you try to find books, you try to find answers. I mean, now we have the internet, so maybe I could have stumbled upon some of this sooner. But at the time, it was just, who's going to tell me the answers to these questions? How am I going to figure this out? So you learn things in school, you try to put the pieces together. And I did the best I could. So I turned 16 and I met another teenage girl, and she was a vegan because her family, they were all vegans. And of course, when you're a vegan, you proselytize. I mean, it's just part of being a vegan. So of course, she was telling everybody all about being a vegan and why she was a vegan and why you should be a vegan. And I was enthralled. I mean, I thought this was, I was being delivered the stone tablets, kind of like, here it is, the truth.
that's
And
what you were looking for.
it was. I mean, I wanted the answers to these questions, and she handed me a bunch of answers. At the time, I had no way to find out better information. Like I couldn't do a compare and contrast because I didn't have anything else. This is part of the problem. So she hands me all this stuff and tells me to read, these 3 books. I ran out and I did it, like Francis Morlapé, the Diet for a Hungry Planet, all that stuff. Like I just took it all, right? And okay, it made sense. So a week or two, that was it. I was going to be a vegan as well, because this is how we're going to save the animals. This is how we're going to save the planet. This is how we're going to feed the hungry people. And also, you're going to save your health if you do this. So there was no reason not to, as far as I was concerned. It seemed like, yeah, this is the answer that I want. This explains everything. And with this one simple act, I can be part of the solution to everything that ails us. And that is very compelling, especially if you're 16 years old and very impassioned.
It's a great story. It really is.
So that's what I did. So 20 years later, it all collapsed, but I kept at it, God knows. So part of it is also just personality type because, I know this about myself. I have a fanatic edge. It's easy for me to get into things that are kind of intense,
Mm-hmm.
um, and that, are going to have that sort of that fervor to them. And I need to be careful about that. So, the vegan one I learned the hard way. And it has definitely helped me as a grown up to know you got to watch it, Lierre, because sometimes you can get caught up in crazy stuff. If you think it's the right thing to do, you're going to take it and run with it until you grind yourself into the dirt. So I did learn my own lesson, though it did extract a price, because you don't do this for 20 years without permanent damage. And some of this I will carry forever. So that's the cautionary tale. That's the
Yeah.
cautionary tale, because it's
What
not
was the
just,
experience like though? Like, so when you
well,
started out, did it initially feel right and make sense? And how long was it before you started to feel like something was off or wrong?
yeah, I mean, that's a very good question. So I would say for the first 2 or 3 months, I felt pretty good. Um, Part of it is that I was never a junk food vegan. You will meet vegans who live on potato chips and Oreo
Mhm.
cookies because those things are vegan. And those people are never going to feel well. I mean, there's not even going to be like a high at the beginning where they feel better. That's just junk food. I think we can all admit that is just junk food. Addictive junk food. I get the draw, but that you're not going to live on that. But I never did that. Like the moment that I went vegan, it's like I didn't touch white sugar. I wasn't going to eat white flour. I wasn't going to eat white rice. Everything had to be whole grain, whatever, whole bean, legume, whatever, some nuts. And this, you got to remember, was 1980. So they didn't have all this highly processed sort of fake soy food, which is good because I would have eaten a lot of that. And the more soy you eat, the worse this is for you. I mean, trust me on that one. So I didn't eat a lot of soy products because they just didn't exist at that time. We didn't have all those soy analogs. So really, if you were a vegan then, it was like lentils and beans, various kinds, brown rice, udon noodles. I remember eating a lot of those.
A lot of vegetables and fruits, probably.
Vegetables, yeah. I was never a big fruit eater, but definitely, I learned to cook a lot of different vegetables. And so I think, as far as a vegan diet goes, it was probably as good as it gets. Right? Because I really meant it. Like I just didn't eat sugar. I wouldn't even eat ketchup if it had sugar in it. Like I had to get the special kind that it was called unketchup at the time, that because legally you had to put sugar in it to call it ketchup. I don't know if that's changed, but that used to be a
Interesting.
federal regulation. So they had to call it unketchup. And I think like Erewhon or one of those companies made it, but it didn't have sugar in it. So I was like, all right, I can eat that kind. So I mean, it was really like I meant it. I really, really meant it. So I would say about 3 months in, I started to have the first problems, which were, now I know it was blood sugar. At the time, I had no idea what was going on, but I would suddenly have this terrible sensation. I would be shaking and kind of sweating, and I wanted to cry. And all I knew was that I had to put food in my mouth or I was going to die.
Wow.
And that's clearly like the bottom of the blood sugar roller coaster that you're on when you eat nothing but carbohydrate. But nobody had told me that. So, I mean, that went on for 18 years and just got worse and worse and worse. So the last 2 years that I was a vegan, I tried to do like a low carb version because I did finally figure that out. At that point, there's nothing to eat. But anyway, we'll get to that. So anyway, I started to get on that blood sugar thing. So what happens is, probably a lot of your listeners already know how that blood sugar thing works, but you eat a load of carbohydrate and you can make yourself feel better by saying it's like whole grain, complex carbohydrate. At the end of the day, I'm telling you, it doesn't matter. It's all broken down into simple sugars in your intestines. That's what they do so that it can enter your bloodstream, because a big chunk of stuff isn't going to get in there. It has to be broken down into really small little bits. And in the case of carbohydrate, that's just sugar. So now it can enter your bloodstream and it's just a load of sugar. And now your body has to deal with it. So our brains can only survive in a very narrow range of blood sugar, too much or too little, and we are in serious trouble, and it is a biological emergency. So when I had that feeling, I'm going to die if I don't put food in my mouth, that's real.
Yeah.
Like that is in fact what's happening. So
I tell my clients that all the time.
yeah,
It's like, it's
you're
not a
not
willpower
crazy.
thing. You're
Yeah.
not, it's like,
It's not emotional.
you're battling your
Yeah.
physiology and
Yeah.
biology, and it's giving you these signals. Yeah.
And for a reason, like you really are in an emergency state. Any
Yeah.
diabetic can tell you, you can fall into a coma at that point if your blood sugar is too low. You'll fall asleep and then you'll fall into a coma, and it's really scary. So anyway, it felt terrible. So you eat all that sugar. Now your blood sugar is too high, right? Because it's all just been released into your bloodstream, and we were never meant to handle that amount of sugar. So your body says, "Oh no, this is way too much sugar. We're like soaking the brain in sugar here and we can't handle it. So you need to do something fast." And the emergency response is the pancreas says, all right, we're on it. And there's this massive release of insulin. But of course, it's more insulin than you need. This is not a finely tuned mechanism. It's an emergency response. So again, more evidence that we were never meant to handle this as humans. This is really not our preferred state. So it's too high. In comes the insulin to, provide the emergency relief. And insulin circulates through your blood and grabs everything that it can as fast as it can and shoves it into the first place that it can find for storage. And that's your fat cells, more or less. So in goes everything that it can get, and it just shoves it in there. And insulin is called the fat storage hormone for this reason. It gets it in to the fat cells, and then it just holds it there. So it's like it's locked into place. And in the presence of insulin, none of that can get back out. Well, that's to keep you alive, so that, again, you don't have that high blood sugar problem. But you do this day after day, year after year. This is why America now has an obesity epidemic, because everybody did what they were told and started eating these high carb, low fat diets day after day, year after year. All of this sugar comes pouring in. All of it got stored away in our fat cells, and we can't access any of it to burn it off. Yeah. So year by year, everybody gets heavier and heavier. And this is the exact mechanism. And it's not complicated. We know that insulin does this. It's why it's called the fat storage hormone. And then people put themselves through all kinds of horrible dietary things, and also, this sort of mental, I'm a bad person. I failed. I have no willpower. It's not your fault. This is biological. You can't access those stores. So you try to put yourself on a diet. It's not going to work. You're just going to feel exhausted and tired and crying all the time, and your mood is going to be wretched, and you're going to be mad at everybody, and you're going to give up in a week or two because you feel so awful. Well, you do. And that's because no one's told you the truth about this. It's not going to work.
And then the advice that they get, if they try to get some dietary advice, is like, you can't eat animal foods because that's bad for you. So what's left? You've got plants and carbs, so
all that's left is more of the same. And so every time you eat, you're just shoving more of those calories into the fat cells, and you can't access them back. So you're more and more tired, and you're heavier and heavier every year, and you can't figure out what's wrong with you. It's not a personal failing. This is what your body was designed to do in an emergency. But the problem is that, the powers that be have told us, well, this is normal, and it's not. Okay, this is not a good thing for humans to be doing, as we can see in terms of public health. So anyway, so that's the part when it's too high. Now insulin has grabbed everything, shoved it away. Problem is, it's now too low because, like I said, it's not a finely tuned mechanism. Now you've got low blood sugar. So even though you just ate, all of a sudden you feel terrible. And I need a snack. I have to eat. What's wrong with me? I don't know. But if I don't eat something, I'm going to fall over. And I lived like that for almost 20 years, and I had no idea what was wrong. So it was just this constant snacking. And the thing is, that's become utterly normalized now because so many people took the advice of our public institutions and tried to eat these high carb, low fat diets. And so everybody is on that roller coaster all the time. So, I mean, there's so many, I go to meetings, or you go to a gathering of whatever kind, and anybody who is still in that kind of dietary world, you see it, you meet at 9 o'clock, by 10, they have to have their first coffee break to have A, the caffeine, and B, a carbohydrate snack of some kind. And then they have lunch, it's the same thing. Then at 2 o'clock, same thing, 4 o'clock, another snack. And then they go home and have dinner. And it's like, I've been there, and I know how bad you feel. And this isn't normal. You don't have to do this to yourselves. It's really horrible to watch, because and then what can you do? Because you can't just walk up to strangers and say, I know what ails you.
Right.
I can fix
even
this.
though most of us have been there, it's like
it's like, you just hope that it comes up in conversation, and then you can sort of present, I used to be that. I know how bad you're feeling. There's actually a way out. Or, you know, like my master plan, my real hope here is that there's enough of us now who understand this, that there's been pushback, so that anybody who's still going through this will eventually stumble upon better information.
Yeah,
And you
absolutely.
try this for 3 or 4 days and you're like, wow, how was I living moment by moment in that state? Because it's wretched. And another one of the hormones that gets released to deal with this is, of course, adrenaline. So you're in this like constant state of like near rage at everything, because you're like cooked up on your own adrenaline just to live through these blood sugar, you know, rises and falls. So yeah, anyway, so that's life when you are eating this high carb diet of whatever kind, even if you're eating a little butter now and then, like, and you're not pure vegan, it doesn't matter. If you're doing
Right.
the high carb thing, plant-based, whatever, this is your life.
Yeah.
And every year it's going to get worse. You're going to wear out those insulin receptors more and more and more, so that every time you do the crash, it's a shorter amount of time and you need more sugar at the bottom of it to feel better. And you don't know what's wrong. All you know is that you're getting fatter every year. You're more exhausted. You know, your cholesterol's out of control. You're headed toward diabetes. You've got beginnings of heart disease. You know, all these other issues are happening. Your brain, you're going to get Alzheimer's, you know, the autoimmune stuff. And nobody will tell you the truth about what's going on. You're trying your best to do what you're told, and
You
it's not
think you're
working.
doing the right thing and it's
You
not
do.
working out for you at all.
And it's not working. And like, you just
Yeah.
feel slightly crazy all the time. Like, why do I feel so bad? And it's not your fault. It's not your fault.
So
So
within 3
anyway,
months, you
so that was the
experienced
first
that,
thing.
right? Yeah. Yeah.
That was the
Okay.
first. It was 3 months in, I was having these like really bad blood sugar swings, and I didn't know what it was. I just was like, it was so bewildering. Like, why am I going? What? I don't even have a name for it. It's like I'm just like shaking and sweating. I'm like, oh my God, I feel so much better if I eat a whatever, you know? So that just went on and on, years and years of that. And, you know, to the point where I know so many people who went on things like antidepressants, who were diagnosed with things like bipolar disorder. And I'm not saying bipolar is not real, and obviously depression is quite real, but sometimes, honestly, there's a nutritional cure for this.
Yeah,
If you
absolutely.
just let your blood sugar go normal and you eat a diet appropriate to the human template, sometimes that's really what it was, which I understand, because the emotional swings with this were horrible.
Yeah.
A little more extreme, and I could totally see getting a bad diagnosis for something like bipolar, because it really is that bad sometimes. So anyway, you know, good luck to those of you who have those kinds of diagnoses, because I know that can be a hard road. Anyway, so that was the first thing that went bad. Second
And
thing
a
that
big
went
one,
bad.
a big one. I don't remember you talking that much about the blood sugar handling issue, but
Oh, the blood sugar is just, it was horrible.
yeah.
Yeah. And it was such a relief when I figured out what was going on. But anyway, so there was that. Second thing was pretty early on, maybe a year or two into this, I completely stopped menstruating. Another thing that happens to women who are on these kind of high carb, low fat diets. I know that men have sort of a parallel problem when they go vegan. So the issue here is especially your sex hormones. So the thing nobody tells you, all of your hormones are made from cholesterol. Cholesterol is like the mother substance. And then from there, your body makes whatever hormones you need. So if you're not giving it any cholesterol, it doesn't really have enough. You can make a lot. Your liver, one of the main functions of your liver is to make cholesterol, but you do need to eat some as well. Like, you need so much on a moment to moment basis that you really can't just rely on your liver to make it. You have to eat some. And when you eat these kinds of diets, vegan or whatever, you're not getting any. So your body has fallback plans to keep you alive. Like, we're going to sort of prune what we need and what we don't need in the moment. The
And
stuff
fertility
about
is not yeah, exactly.
well, you don't need to have a baby right now to stay alive.
Yeah.
And in fact, your body's reading the scene and saying, I don't think we're really in any shape to be having a baby. I'm not seeing enough fat here to produce live young. So let's just put that on hold for now. We're going to keep you alive day to day. When you get some more fat in here, you let us know, and then we'll talk about having a baby. Until then, we're putting it all on ice. We're just going to keep you alive, you know, on a daily basis. So you just stop making sex hormones. So you're limping along. And here I was, this like very young woman, you know, I'm 18, 19, 20 years old, and I've got like no fertility, right? And nobody can tell me why. This now seems so obvious, but not a single doctor was ever able, oh, you don't menstruate regularly. Well, I don't know. They're like, you can go on the birth control pill if you're worried about it. I'm like, that's not really an answer to the problem here. Like, no, I don't want to go on the birth control pill. Like, I want to know what's wrong. I was like, I don't know. It's just weird sometimes. I can't tell you what's going on. Nobody ever asked me a single question about, young lady, what do you eat? And I know doctors don't really get nutritional training, and especially at that point in the culture, it was nothing but that will kill you. Don't eat animal products. Everybody should just be eating carbohydrate all day long. So even if they had asked me, they would have been like, well, you're doing all the right things. So unless I had gotten really lucky, I was never going to get an answer out of the medical profession at that point. Things had changed enough that I think there's way more awareness about this now. But
there's
at the
more
time,
awareness, but it's still very
it's still
much
an
in that
uphill battle.
direction.
I
Yeah,
know.
yeah,
They
yeah.
grabbed all the institutions back in 1980. And it's definitely, we still have to keep fighting for this. But anyway, so that was number two that went downhill. And then about when I was 18, so 2 years in, I started to get this terrible pain in my back that was just unrelenting. So that again was like, I go to specialist after specialist, and all they could say was, you're too young. There can't really be anything wrong with you. We don't actually know what's going on. Some of them were nicer than others about it, but I didn't get an answer. Now, part of this problem is that they did not have MRIs back then. So all they could do was an X-ray, and my bones did look fine, but it's my discs. So I have really severe degenerative disc disease. So the joints in my spine started falling to pieces, which is not supposed to be a thing that happens to you when you're 18 years old. Like maybe when you're 85, we can just call that life, but I was 18. Like that's crazy. Eventually, years go by and they do invent MRIs, and eventually I managed to get one. Then the diagnosis, like, oh, well, this is pretty awful, in fact. So now, like if a new doctor ever looks at, my medical record and they get to the MRI, to the film, and they look at the pictures and they read the report, they're like, were you in some kind of massive car accident? Like you were only 18? I'm like, no, like you fell off a roof. No. Skydiving? I mean, this is really bad. I'm like, yes, I know it's really bad. I live with it. No, I mean, I'll tell you what I think. It's the nutritional equivalent, which was going vegan. And I can walk you through, like step by step, exactly how this ends up with degenerating joints. And I am not the only one. Anybody who does this long term is likely to end up with knee problems, hip problems, the kind of spine problems that I have. Your joints are going to fall apart. You cannot keep them healthy if you're not eating enough minerals. If all the minerals you are eating are getting sucked out of your body by the phytic acid in the wonderful whole grains, we can talk about how plants fight back, but that's one way that they do it. And also, the human body cannot absorb minerals in the digestive tract without some fat. They just pass right through you. So even if you're eating like every kind of mineral you could ever imagine, which you're not if you're a vegan, you're getting very few, you don't have any way to actually absorb them without some good quality fat. So, step by step, I just killed it. And I ended up with a really bad problem. It is degenerative. It is not fixable.
Yeah,
So
it's irreversible at that point, right?
completely. Yeah. You don't get your joints back. You can do things like reduce inflammation. Eating a more appropriate human diet absolutely dropped my pain level. But I mean, I can get the fentanyl patch if I want. Like that's how bad my pain level is. So, and I don't want opioids, make me very ill. So I have a very hard time with them. But pain management is really all I've got at this point. So I've tried a few of the sort of newer, more interesting interventions that they have for people with degenerating joints, but none of them have worked in my case. So there may be some miracle, coming down the pike in my lifetime, like who knows. But to date, I just had to live with it. I just had to, make peace with what I've done. So this is part of my survivor mission, is really trying to reach out to other, especially the young idealistic vegans, the people who are still trying to do this diet, and explain to them that it's not going to end well. If you do this long term, you really should understand there's an entire generation of us out here who already tried this. And I can tell you the damage we ended up with, the same thing is going to happen to you. If you are human, we are the same animal. Like it's not like rabbits have different diets for some
That's
of them.
exactly. I just did a talk yesterday, and I was talking about this, and everyone likes to say, "Yeah, we're all individuals and we're all
We're
different,"
not.
but we're all
We're
humans,
not.
and we all have the same digestive system.
So anyway, so that went wrong. And then I also ended up with a condition called gastroparesis, which usually only diabetics get, but anybody with really severe blood sugar issues where it's up and down and up and down, you can end up with this. And so what happens is the mechanism here is actually laid out. I understand what I've done. So like I said, adrenaline is part of that sort of release when you've got the too much insulin and not enough insulin. Adrenaline is also one of the hormones that your body, kind of pops out into your blood so that it can get control of the too high blood sugar. And it works for the same reason that adrenaline is meant to do for you. So if you're standing out on the savannah and a lion is running towards you, you want some adrenaline. And what adrenaline does is it sends all the energy to the really big muscles in your body so that you can either do fight or flight. And it kind of shuts down everything else so that all your energy just goes to helping you survive the next 2 minutes. But what that means is it also shuts down any digestive processes that are happening. And this is why under extreme stress, people vomit. You all know that feeling. You're walking out on stage and you're terrified, and all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, I really might vomit. That's what's happening. You're getting hit with that adrenaline load, and adrenaline is saying, fine, we're ditching all the food. We don't need to deal with this right now. Get everything out of there, grind to a halt. All the energy is just going to be, you're either going to punch that lion, hope for the best, or you're running for your life up the nearest tree. But that's where your energy needs to go. And also, people can get diarrhea in really high stress situations. It's the same thing. Your digestive tract is just releasing, just go, get out of here. We're just going to fight or flight. So you're doing this to yourself over and over and over again throughout the day when you eat a high carb diet. So you're getting this huge thing, this huge release of adrenaline. And what it's doing is it's suppressing your body's ability to make hydrochloric acid, because that's the main thing that our stomachs use to break down our food. So because you're putting yourself in an emergency situation and adrenaline has come to the rescue, it stops your stomach momentarily from doing anything. But you do that to yourself 5, 6, 7 times a day over the course of 20 years, you basically destroy your stomach's capacity to do that, or you very severely damage it. And that's what I did. So I have a hard time eating anything, but I take betaine hydrochloride is the magic.
Yeah,
and it's great stuff. And it completely, I was nauseated for like 18, 20 years of my life, just solid. Unless I didn't eat for 2 days, there was something in my stomach that would not go away. It was the most horrible feeling, and nobody could help me. The acupuncturist helped a little bit, but then one day I was actually in a Weston Price group, and there was a guy there who was a doctor, and he's like, "Oh, you're the one who's the long-term vegan." I'm like, "Yeah, that was me." He's like, "I know what's wrong with you and I can fix it." He had never even seen me in person. He's just like, "This is the thing. Go to the store, buy this stuff.
I can tell right away.
Talk to me tomorrow." And I was like, "Can't hurt me, whatever, let me try it." And it was a miracle. So I still have to take betaine, not as much of it, but I will probably have to take that for the rest of my life. So, and I have helped so many people with that little trick. They're like, "I feel sick all the time." Yeah, let me explain to you what you did. Adrenaline, hydrochloric acid, your poor stomach. I get it. So try betaine hydrochloride. It cannot hurt you. Take it for a few days. Let me know how you do. And it usually is like, wow, I'm a new person. Yeah.
Well, it's like in your avoidance of eating meat, you lose your capacity to eat meat because the acid is also what you use to break down your proteins. And
exactly. So some people have that problem when they go back to eating meat, even if they weren't having digestive problems. Suddenly it can be kind of hard. And they're like, "Oh, it's my blood type." I'm like, "It's not your blood type. You did this to yourself. Please just try the betaine. I promise you will feel better." So I did that. My skin was so
did you start taking the betaine when you were still vegan, or was this after?
No, that was when I was a few years out. Yeah. Okay. Like some of my problems had gotten better at that point, but I still felt just nauseated all the time. And then that guy gave me that special trick, and I'm so grateful, because that just completely flipped it over in one day. I was like, wow, this is amazing not to feel nauseated. It was incredible. So
your most painful symptoms, started like relatively early on. There were some indications, and it was your blood sugar handling. Yeah, it's like, okay, I'm getting some science here, but it was your blood sugar, it was your menstrual cycle, and some pain that you had, some degeneration, and that just got worse as time went on. Yeah. At what point did you realize, hey, maybe this isn't working out for me? And how did you make the decision, to transition?
Well, years go by. I just feel worse and worse. I'm so exhausted, I can barely stand up. I also had that whole constellation of depression, anxiety, emotional instability stuff. That stuff just clears up almost immediately when you eat a proper diet, but I didn't know that. So all that's going on, every year it's just harder and harder. And then what happened to me was, I think the background was that all my friends, my whole social network, all of us are as committed to these ideas, right? So everybody's at least a vegetarian. Everybody knows that vegan is like, the North Star. We should all be trying to be vegan, even if we can't do it. And, looking back on this, it's so funny that, everybody would have these moments where even if they were sort of semi-vegan, it'd be like, "Oh, I ate cheese last night." And it was like the big confession. And you were supposed to say, "Oh yeah, that's so terrible." Well, that's good. Just get back on the wagon. You'll be all right. You know, it was like this whole sort of religious ritual almost about, you know, admitting to how bad you've been. But the fact that every single one of us did it and then had to confess, like,
And probably felt better, right? When they had a little.
dramatically better. That's the thing. Like,
Yeah.
you know, there's all these rumors like, oh, you're going to vomit and you're going to feel so terrible and you're going to have all this like discharge and like these crazy things like, oh, your nose is going to get all, you know, mucusy. And like, none of that ever happened. You felt so good for an hour. But it's like, none of us ever said, maybe, just maybe, this isn't the right thing for humans. If all of us are having these tremendous cravings that we cannot stop, and in fact, once in a while even have to give into, and I'll tell you, in my circle, I was like the most hardcore. It was like so rare, you know, but most of them was like twice a week they'd be eating cheese, you know, and then they'd feel guilty about it. It was like, there's something here. If none of us, even those of us who believe in it this strongly, can't pull it off, what does that say?
Yeah.
And that was the question we could never ask.
Yeah.
That was the question. But I will say, one by one, everybody stopped doing it. And some of them did it more quietly, and some of them were a little more vocal about it, but I was the last holdout. Okay. So like my sister did something very similar. She did it for 14 years, wrecked her knees and her ankles. You know, ended up with really severe endometriosis, absolutely triggered by soy. There's no question the soy is what did it. Had to have a hysterectomy, like on and on. And she gave up before I did, about 6 years before I did. And I remember she was the one most of all, of course, who tried to tell me, you would feel so much better if you would just eat some fish. Just start there. Just
And you weren't ready then? It was
no,
6
I
years
was like,
later that
no,
you.
I'm a vegan. It's terrible. I'm not going to hurt animals. This is the wrong thing. It's going to kill the planet. It's, you know, blah, 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 like all the different reasons why I thought being vegan was the only way that, you know, anything good could ever happen on the planet. And I still believed it all. So I was like, no, this can't be true. It cannot be true that humans can't be vegan, because then everything's going to fall apart. The entire cosmos is going to collapse on me. If it's not true, it has to be true, because I had built everything. My entire worldview was built up around this. So really, when you're a vegan, it's like, it's your sense of self.
Yeah.
You know, it's not just what you eat, it's who you are. And like, letting go of that is so hard. It really is a very similar experience to being in a cult. And I'm not going to call it a cult because it's not quite that, but there are some very cult-like elements in this. So I wasn't going to do it. And so, you know, my friend, well, you know, I'm eating chicken now. I feel a lot better. I'm like, not me. I'm not going to do it. You do whatever you want, but I'm not going to do it. So it's like, you know, one by one. So luckily, I mean, that was the only thing that really helped, was knowing that like pretty much everybody in my life had given this up already. And I was, like I said, the last one. So I finally, one day, went to see this guy who was a Qigong healer, and he was from China, and his whole life had been, you know, he's dedicated to doing Chinese medicine, which is, you know, very, very ancient form of healing. It's not related to Western medicine at all. Like, it's a whole different worldview, how they heal people. And I respected him very much, and I respect that form of medicine very much. I'd been to acupuncture and had some good results with some things. But then every time I went to an acupuncturist, they all said the same thing, which is, I can't do very much for you because of what you eat, and you need to eat meat. And I'd be like, no, I'm not going to eat meat. Do whatever else you can do for me. And they're like, well, here's the herbs, and you can do some needles. But at the end of the day, if you're not willing to eat meat, there's not that much I can do for you. And I just didn't want to hear it. I mean, I went through about 6 acupuncturists over the years who all said the same thing. And I just was like, nope, 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 it's not true. And I'm not going to hear it. Anyway, this was sort of the end of the road for me. The very last day I went to see this, you know, he's much older than me, and I respected him very much. And he's just a very decent, kind human being. And I got an appointment and to see him, and they do, you know, the basic diagnosis in Chinese medicine is they feel for your pulses, and that's not quite the same as what we think of as a pulse. But anyway, they put their fingers on your wrists in various places, and he was like, wow, you have nothing left. You have no, what they call qi. There's no energy here. There's nothing. He was like amazed. I was like, wow. Well, am I dead? Like, what is it? And he's like, he didn't think it was a joke. He's like, basically, yes. I mean, like, whatever you're doing, you have to stop. Like, this is very bad. I'm like, yeah, I know. My spine's falling apart. I got all these problems. That's why I'm here. And he's like, what do you eat? I'm like, oh, I'm a vegan and I don't. He's like, no. Like,
You're
again,
like, at this point, you were ready to kind of give in because you'd heard
basically,
so
yeah. I
much.
mean, it's like I sort of knew it was coming. Like if I go see this guy,
Yeah.
he's probably going to say the same thing. So I think I was just almost ready to hear it as like, or I
Mhm.
wouldn't have gone. Like I kind of know what he's going to tell me, but I was so desperate. I was in so much pain at that point. You know, my spine, it was so bad. I was like, I just want some answers here. So when he's like, you're just going to have to eat meat, I started crying, of course, but I kind of knew maybe he was right. Like enough of my friends had already said this to me. It's like,
Mm.
they all feel better. I don't know. And he was so kind. He's like, well, do you have a religious belief? Like, why? Why does this matter so much? I was like, I don't want to hurt animals. He's like, well, the big fish eat the little fish. I was like, I'm not a fish. I'm human. I should be able to decide, and I don't want to do harm. And this is really important to me. I'm like crying, you know, and he's just like patting my hand, like, it's just reality. It's the way it is. It's just nature. You can't fight this, you know, basically you just have to accept it. And it was so hard.
Mm.
So, you know, I stopped crying, like, all right, I'll be a grown up. If I eat meat, am I going to feel better? He's like, what, are you crazy? Of course you're going to feel better. Please eat some meat. So I was like, all right, all right, all right. So that was like the best thing he could do for me. So I got out of the appointment and I thought, all right, well, I'm ready to try it. So,
I was gonna
but you
say, what's
know,
the choice here? Like, what did you
well,
go
I figured
for?
it was win-win, right? If I could eat a bite, and if I feel better, well, it's going to be hard because I'm going to have to go through this whole emotional process. I don't know what the world is going to mean if this is true, but I will feel better. So that's a win. Or I eat some meat and I don't feel anything, and then they're all wrong, and I can still be a vegan. And haha, I tried it and it didn't make any difference. So either way, I'm going to win. So it's worth trying the experiment. So I went to the grocery store right away, and what I got was a can of tuna fish because I didn't
Oh,
have to cook it and I didn't have to eat it using my silverware or my plates or anything. And I really understood all the people who have religious prescriptions, like if you eat kosher kind of things, like this idea that something is really unclean and it can't touch your dishes. Like I really understood it in that moment. It was like, I don't even want this in my kitchen. It felt
mm.
so horrible. Like just this can of tuna fish was like, Trafe, Trafe, get it away, get it away. I was like, well, I'm going to have to do this. So I was like, tuna fish, I don't have to cook it. And I got a plastic fork so I can throw it out. It's not going to touch my dishes. And I
Wow.
literally just opened the can and I had my plastic fork. And I was like, all right, well, here we go. And I just stared at it like, I got to
Did
do
it
it.
smell good to you, or were you like put off by it,
No,
or
it
was it
didn't
like,
smell good. It didn't smell
yeah,
bad though, because I remember
yeah,
even as a child really enjoying tuna fish. Like I had that
yeah.
sort of summer lemonade.
Nostalgic
We're at the
thing?
beach. Yeah. So it was like,
Mhm.
I have a happy memory of this. And I shouldn't because it's meat and that's terrible. But it was like, it doesn't really smell bad to me. It actually smells like summer fun, kind of like being a kid at the beach, tuna fish sandwiches. Because that's for whatever reason, that was what my mom always packed when we went to the beach. So it was like, oh yeah, that's fun, tuna fish. So I was like, oh, I gotta do this though. And it was really hard. Like it was probably the hardest thing I've ever had to do. It was eat that bite of tuna fish because it just didn't want to do it. But I did, and it was instantaneous. It was
What?
instantaneous. The energy, it was like I was suddenly plugged into a low wattage battery. It was just like humming, like all my cells were like, oh, thank God, we've got some chi now. Not everybody
Wow.
experiences this, but a lot of people do, and they call it the meatgasm. Like when you go back to eating whatever. I got that. It was amazing. I had to lie down. It was so intense the first few times. It was like I just
Wow.
had to lie there for like 20 minutes and just sort of shake all over. And I don't have like a Western scientific way to explain this, but I'll tell you, all the acupuncturists know what I'm talking about. They're like, yeah, you finally had some chi. Yep, that's
Wow.
what happened. And it started the moment it hit my throat. It wasn't in my mouth. That was nothing. But the moment it was like being swallowed, it started. It started and then it hit my stomach and then it just radiated everywhere. So that went on for about 2 weeks. I had that every time I ate it. And then it did
From
calm
that
down.
moment though, were you like, okay, like I get it. Like at that, did you
I
change your beliefs or
cried.
something?
I
Wow.
cried so hard.
Yeah.
It was really awful because that collapse was upon me. I had no idea who I was. I had no idea what any of it meant.
Hmm.
I had no idea how I was going to save the world. And it was a cosmic question at this point, because if my life depended on killing animals, then I didn't really want to be here. Because I wanted to live in a universe where my life was possible without harm to any living creature. And I built that up as a vegan to be a thing that was possible. And what it meant was living in a great deal of denial about what was dying to feed me. It was like a complete cutoff. If it's on my plate, then it matters. So what's on my plate, there's nothing here that had a mother or a face. Therefore, it's nice, peaceful, wonderful, nonviolent food. It didn't matter that entire ecosystems were dying to produce that food. I didn't want to know that. All I wanted to know was, did something die? Is on my plate. And of course, it completely rejects the idea of plant sentience or plant awareness, which always bothered me as a vegan. It's like, why do I think that animals matter but plants don't? And I could never come up with an answer to that question, because I saw that what I was doing was just drawing a line in a slightly different place. So like in my mind, the meteors were like, okay, the cutoff is humans matter, nobody else does. Everything else is for us to use. So we can kill them, we can eat them, we can do whatever we want. And I didn't want to be that person. So it's like, no, animals matter. So I'm cutting the line here. But what I'm saying is plants don't matter. They're just insensate salads and I can do whatever I want. And I knew that that wasn't true. I had talked to trees, like I'd had relationships with plants, and I knew that they were sentient, a different way than we are. It's a different world for them. It's a different nation, a different kind of sentience, but it's no better or worse than ours. And my God, they're the people who make the world possible. They created the oxygen that we breathe. They make the water happen. Like they do everything for us. And this is why most indigenous cultures have there's usually a concept of the trees or whoever, the plants, being like our grandparents. They are. I mean, literally, they came before we came on the planet, and they made the whole atmosphere happen. So they're our grandparents, and they deserve respect, and they will teach us things, and they give us gifts and all of this. And so I had a very hard time as a vegan, because drawing that line, like I'm just making a different pyramid. It's still a pyramid. I'm still saying that I can do whatever I want to plants, just not to animals. And that was very hard. And I never made peace with that as a vegan. Some vegans can make peace with it. They're like, oh, plants don't matter. Of course, that's a joke. Why would plants matter? But I could never be that person. Like I could see that plants were quite alive, and that they built communities, and that they talk to each other. And we know this now through science. They do. They do incredible things with each other, and they build incredible communities. And it's very complicated what's going on out there. And we can even understand some of it. So it's pretty cool. But at the time, none of those books had been written. I was just sort of going on my own experiences. And I was like, I just don't like this thing where I'm drawing a line about what sentience matters and which creatures don't matter. So that was always a problem for me. So that part actually was like, all right, well, I can stop making that line. So that's going to be a little bit easier. But the rest of it was still really, really hard.
Yeah.
Now, here's the other part. Go ahead. Ask your question.
Well, I was going to say, at some point, because you still have this great compassion, you had this realization that in order for anything to live, like something has to die, right? So when did you learn that component of like, okay, so to eat any diet, like something has to be plowed or something has to be mined or researched or something like that?
So this sort of came in pieces. Like there were sort of big chunks of this that sort of, were absorbed into my mental state. That whole time that I was a vegan, I never stopped being intellectually curious, right? So I keep trying to find out, to answer that question, why are humans destroying the world? And when did this start? Like, is there a name for this? Like, where did all this come from? Because I could see, like, we've got all this prehistory. We're here for 2 million years. Some form of humans are here. And for most of that time, it actually looks like we're doing pretty well. We're making beautiful art. We've got musical instruments. We're making clothes. Clearly we're doing rituals. There's cave paintings of people dancing in circles. Like I get that. I can understand what they're doing here. There's amazing things going on. There's this story about when Pablo Picasso went to the caves in Lascaux back when they were still, you can't see them now. Our breath was actually destroying the caves. They got all moldy, so they had to close them to the public, so you can't see them. But what they made instead, which is pretty cool, is a life-size reproduction. So you can go into it as if it was the cave, and it's actually made out of plaster. I don't know, plastic. I don't know what they made it out of, but it's a life-size, completely done reproduction. So you can, as if you were walking through the actual cave. Anyway, Picasso got to see the actual cave, and apparently when he emerged, what he said was, we have invented nothing. Meaning like that whole sweep, all of art history, Western art, for thousands of years is like, they had this 40,000 years ago. Like, who are we fooling? Like, this is what humans do. We make art. Anyway, it looked like to me, like we had done really well for a very long time. And then something went very bad. And ever since then, things have been hard. So what is that thing? And that thing is actually agriculture. So in about maybe 14 places around the globe, people take up this completely different activity, and then everything changes. So from that point forward, it's all downhill. And I didn't want to accept that as a vegan, even though I kept bumping into that same story. Like all the books I was reading pretty much said the same thing about this. But I couldn't, as a vegan, accept that because all my foods were those foods. It wasn't these foods, it was these foods. And that can't be true. Agriculture has to be the way that we save the planet. Never mind that what I'm learning is it's actually quite literally what we have done to destroy the planet. That's what it is. That was very hard. But so I had a lot of that sort of backlogged in my brain and hadn't really been able to sit and think about it because of the veganism. There was such a wall between me and all of this sort of counter information. So one of the nice things about the whole thing collapsing was that that wall collapsed. And it meant that I could sit, okay, I've read this book, this book, this book. And I've also tried my own gardening experiences. All right. I've got all the experiments that I ran in my own backyard.
Oh, I remember the slug
And I'm afraid
story.
this is true. Yeah. Like
Yeah.
everything that I think I know about this, I can now start to really grapple with. So it was hard, but it was also a relief because then I could stop fighting the knowledge that I was accruing, essentially. And some of it was experiential. Like I said, I was trying to raise a lot of my own food, and it can't be done as a vegan. I mean, it was just impossible because what is soil? It's dead plants and dead animals acted upon by bacteria. And that's what it is. That's what topsoil is. And here you are trying to garden without adding any animal inputs. And eventually they call it mining the soil, because you're taking out all the minerals and there's no way to put them back in. The way to get them back in, of course, is manure, blood meal, and bone meal. But if you think I was going to do that as a vegan, I was completely horrified. So like the deeper into organic gardening world I got, the more horrifying it was as a vegan. I was like, this is horrible. So you can get this stuff like different rock powders that'll have some of the same kind of properties that, some of the minerals you might be missing. But this was ridiculous to me. Like, how are you going to get rock powders? You're going to have to mine them, and then you're going to have to grind them up. Somebody's going to do this without fossil fuel. This is just vast industrial equipment to make this happen. This isn't sustainable. Manure, I can see being sustainable. There's no way. So I was like, well, cross that off the list. So really, okay, to garden, you have to, oh no, now animals are involved. What am I going to do? Well, in my case, I had friends that had goats, and they had this barn that was filled with manure, and they're like, come get the manure. So we went and we got some loads of manure, and I was like trying so hard to draw this. My morality here was like just razor thin. Like, I'm not the one keeping the goats. I'm not doing the terrible domestication, animals are enslaved thing. Never mind, these goats were like happy as they could possibly be. But it was like doing their thing, running around all day, eating, climbing, having sex, whatever goats do. Like, they're clearly happy animals. I was like, no, that's terrible. It's domestication. They're being oppressed, but I'm not doing it.
You're just grabbing their poop.
I'm just taking their poop. I'm not doing the bad thing. Like, there's still a line here, and I'm on the good side. Like, that line just got thinner and thinner and thinner. Anyway, of course, I had the most beautiful garden ever because I put the manure on it finally. I mean, it was just night and day, not doing it versus doing it. But the really hard part was the amount of things I had to kill to grow vegetables. And anybody who gardens, you go through this. You're infested with hornworms, or you're infested with like the rabbits. Of course, in New England, we have the deer problem, which is just absolutely endless. This is because you've taken over their land. That's where they lived, and you took it from them and put a fence around it and tried to just grow food for humans. That's what agriculture is. So how are you going to keep these animals out? That's their home. So now you're in a war with the natural world. And that's literally what agriculture is a war against the natural world. I couldn't face that as a vegan, but of course, coming out of it, it was like, all right, I'm going to think about what I've learned here. And my particular personal battle was with the slugs. And I write about this in the Vegetarian Myth, how night after night, the slugs would come and they would eat all the little seedlings in the garden. And then I would replant them, and then they would eat them again. And I think I went through 6 rounds of that. And I tried everything to just repel them non-violently. And there is no way to repel them non-violently. And then I thought, well, I'll try to kill them with beer because at least they'll die happy. I still couldn't do it. And at the end of the day, I just gave up. I thought, all right, well, I can't kill them. I can't be the person that kills slugs. So I'm just going to let them have what they want. And it just means I won't have lettuce, and I won't have, various vegetables that they clearly are just going to keep eating. And this was the moment that I really I feel like I stepped into my adult being, my adulthood, because I went to the store and I was going to buy lettuce because obviously there wasn't any in the garden. And I was literally holding a head of lettuce in my hand. And I felt so peaceful for a moment, like, oh, this is so easy. I can just buy this lettuce. And this whole moral dilemma about having to kill to protect my food is no longer a problem. I'm just going to buy the lettuce. Oh, thank God. I don't have to think about this anymore, because I was really torturing myself over this. I was like, I don't have to do it. Just lay it down and pick up this lettuce and we're good. I can just go back to my ignorance. And I didn't do it. I was like, you know what, Lierre, you already know the answer to this question, and it's not what you want, but it is reality. And you just have to grow up, because somebody killed animals for you to have that lettuce. They shot deer, they shot rabbits, they got a great big dog that chased them all off. They did something to keep the mammals out. And then they went through a bunch of stuff to kill all the insects and the mollusks that were then going to eat the food that you thought was yours. You're not doing it. That's fine if you don't want to do it, but somebody did it for you and you're just paying them. And that's a fine thing. If you don't have time to garden, you don't have the passion to do it. I'm not saying everybody has to garden, but you do have to admit that animals died for that food. And if that food is worth eating, it means that they added manure and blood meal and bone meal to that garden, because the plants, those annual plants, sucked all the minerals out and they had no way to put them back in. There's no way for animals to do that. So that's it. That's what you're eating. Face facts. You don't want to do it, you don't have to, but face facts. There are dead animals in your food. Just stop pretending anymore. You know too much at this point. You can't go back.
So, and this was before your transition, right? So this is
I was already eating meat at that point.
Oh, okay.
But I still was like, I don't want to eat I don't want to kill. I don't want to kill. I'm going to grow my own food. It's going to be all right. I can at least have lettuce. It was a transition. It took a good 2 years to get from here to there. It was not easy. And then, and I know this is like the worst cliche in the world, but I had a friend who's Native American, and I'm going through this whole trauma about the whole thing. And she just looks at me with like a lot of sympathy. I mean, a very compassionate person, but also I got to say a little bit of pity, because it is pitiful that I was like 34 years old and didn't know this. And she's just like, Lierre, for something to live, something else has to die. That's it. That's everything. Like, you should know this. And I was like, yeah, okay, I didn't know that. I'm learning it, and I'm a little old for this, but thank you for helping. And what are you growling about, baby? So that was it. She knew it. This is just like basic wisdom that we all should have. I'm sure she learned it by the time she was 4. It took me a few more decades to figure it out, but I did on my own basically figure this out. So, but it was hard. And this is like, I hold their hands all the time. I get these, sorry, one of my dogs wants to go back out. I get these kinds of emails from people who are on the edge. They're teetering on the edge of still being vegan. And this is always the question. They have such a hard time with this part of it. It's like, I don't want anything to die. I don't want to kill anything. I want, my life to be the life that doesn't involve death. And it's such a hard thing. It's like, that's not an option we're given. The plants eat animals, the animals eat plants, some animals eat animals, but everybody's eating something. And this is really, it's hard, but it's also beautiful. There's no line to draw. It's a circle.
Yeah.
So at this point right now, you're living in this part of the circle, but you're going to die. And every last molecule is then going to be reabsorbed into this cycle. So next time, it's like part of you is going to be a plant. This molecule is going to be a baby fox. This molecule is going to be the redwood tree. And then somebody's going to eat those things. And then that molecule they'll just keep moving along. And that's it. Like, there's just momentary little collections, where that's your carbon shape for now. And you have this consciousness, but then it passes, and then you get dispersed again and you come up as something else. Like, that's the wisdom we should all have. And so then really the question is, if it's just a cycle, how do we make it stronger?
Yeah.
Rather than how do we destroy it? And when I was a vegan, I was eating all the foods that destroy it. And that's the part that's hard for vegans. It's that, in fact, death is part of that cycle. And if it's done well, it makes it stronger.
Yeah, and there's ways to do it all better, but it sounds like throughout your entire journey, you came to this realization that I have to first do what's right for my health, so that I can be the best version of myself and make the decisions and fight for the causes that I want to in the best way, so I feel better. And then within that context, you're trying to figure out what's the best way for me to do the best nutrition for me, but that's also good for or better for the environment or the planet or my community and things like that. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, and then the one nice thing about all of this was that after 2 or 3 years of really stumbling through this wilderness of my sort of collapsed, kind of worldview, cosmic place, all of this, these horrible questions that you grapple and you grapple, but at the end of the day, it did all come around. Like it all came back together. And that at least felt, I got restored. I didn't just spend, the next decades just going, none of it makes any sense. It did at the end of the day come back together into a really good, like a path forward. And also, I got enough information that I can explain to other people. And there really is a way forward. And it does meet the needs of the nutritional, what humans need for our template. And it also really helps the planet. So I put it back together in a better way. So the number one thing we can do to help the planet right now is to restore what we've destroyed. And what that means is we need to stop doing agriculture. So people really need to understand what agriculture is. And you take a piece of land and you clear every living thing off it. And I mean down to the bacteria, right? And then you plant that just for humans. So what happens first off is that it's mass extinction, because all those plants and animals, they got nowhere to go. And this is what we've done, continent after continent. I mean, all of them except Antarctica, really. Any piece of land that could have been taken for agriculture has basically been taken, and it's been destroyed. Because you do this year after year after year, there's not going to be anything left of that soil. So we've drawn down the topsoil. I mean, we talk about drawing down things like fossil fuel and surface metals and all this, but what we've really drawn down is the soil, which has been around for thousands of years. It takes a long, long time to build that soil, and very, very quickly humans destroyed it. So okay. So we destroy the soil, and what that means, that's the basis of land life.
Yeah, I think for everybody listening, this in Bright Green Lives, I read that the topsoil is like 6 feet thick. And now, wasn't it like the topsoil like 6 feet thick or something
topsoil
like
in some
that?
places 12 feet deep, and
Yeah,
it's just gone. And some of it was lost in one day. You can see photographs from the first day of the Dust Bowl, like in South Dakota, and there's just this mountain of soil. That's like the air is absolutely, you can't see it. It's like brown with soil, and all that soil went across the continent, and it got halfway across the Atlantic Ocean before it finally fell out of the air. That's how much dirt was. That's just it. It was the soil. And that was the end of it. So it's going to take a long time to build it back. So
agriculture basically stripping the land of everything. Yeah, and so everything. Your view is something regenerative, where we have a balance of animals and rotational farming, or what's your perspective?
Well, I think that we need to give up the annuals altogether, which means we need to stop
animals.
So all the annual crops, it was a disaster for the planet. It was a disaster for human health. So what happens is, because for the moment that you start doing this, you're on what's called drawdown. You're using it up, right? And that is, agriculture is what made, quote, civilization possible. So what civilization is this very specific pattern of human life. And it revolves around cities. And that's literally what the word means. Civilization is life in cities. But what that means is the people who live there need more than the land can give. So everything has to come from somewhere else, right? The food, the water, the energy, the trees, whatever you're using has to be imported, right? You think about a city, it's just concrete. There's nothing there. It's all been taken. So the only way to do that is to go out into some other area and take it and bring it back in. And this will require eventually a military. This is why agricultural societies always end up militarized at the end of the day, is because the people who live there use up their stuff, and then they have to go out and take it from somebody else. And that's been the pattern of human settlement for the last 10,000 years. So you have this sort of bloated power center that'll be the big city, like say Rome, pick your city, but that'll be it. And then there's sort of an ever increasing sort of imperialist project where they have to conquer their neighbors and then take all their stuff, because nobody willingly gives up their land, their water, their trees, their soil. So you have to go and take it, and then they bring it back into the power center. Eventually it collapses because, of course, you're just stripping the land of all of that stuff. And then, every time you do this, the water table is shrinking because there's no perennial plants left. There's no trees left. All the soil slides off into the local waterways, so into the streams and the rivers. It clogs up the mouth of any harbor. There were harbors around the Mediterranean during the time of both the Greeks and the Romans, where they kept having to move the actual harbor like 10 miles because there was so much silt running down off the mountains through the rivers, and then it would build up, and then the harbor was no longer useful, so they'd have to extend it again. So 10 miles at a time, they were moving these harbors because the Mediterranean was just plugging up with all that soil. And that's the fate of every civilization. Eventually it just collapses because they use up all the soil. So there's no civilization that's lasted more than 2,000 years. It's usually 800 to 2,000 years, literally the length of the time that the soil lasts. Once the soil's gone, it's over, and then it collapses. The problem now is that by the year 1950, the planet was pretty well out of topsoil, and we should have had an absolutely massive collapse at that point, and we didn't. And the reason is because of fossil fuel. The scientists had figured out this thing called the Haber-Bosch process, but essentially they figured out how to get usable nitrogen out of gas and oil. And that's what we've been eating ever since. Yeah. There's no human being essentially alive on the planet that does not have, as our nitrogen in our bodies, at least half the nitrogen in our bodies comes from oil or gas.
Well, it sounds like what you're saying, what's ideal is going back to local, community-based, rotational, using animals, herbivores that nurture the land and, have chickens come behind them and then planting crops and that whole regenerative thing that we
it has to be based on perennials. It can't be based on annuals. You need to understand what perennials do. They have a very deep root system because they live many, many years. Annuals only live a few seasons and then they're done. So if you think about wheat or whatever, it's not perennial, right? You harvest it in September, it's over. This is very, very different. It's completely opposite of perennials that last a long time. If you think about a tree, right? The trees where I live are 2,000 years old. So that's a long time. And because they live a long time, they have really, really deep root systems. Whether it's trees or grasses, it goes down really, really far. So the roots are really crucial here because they do three things that are absolutely, you can't do without if you're going to have life on the land. One is that it actually provides a physical channel for water to enter the soil. So without those roots, the rain it batters the soil down. It just creates this sort of dead mud. And then it'll just wash off any kind of little slope. It'll just wash off into wherever the nearest creek or river is and destroy that with all of that runoff. And if this is true, if you go to a parking lot and you look around, you'll see areas of bare dirt and there'll just be a puddle of water if it rains. And then right next to it, there'll be a little strip of grass with like a decorative tree. Oh, what do you know? There's no puddle of water there because the grass and the tree are actually absorbing, helping the water. It's literally the physical channel by which rain enters the soil are those deep roots. So they do that. The roots are deep enough that they can reach down to the rock that's sort of underneath everything. And they can actually break up the rock. You and I cannot eat rock. Like there's no human that eats rocks for breakfast. Like we know this, right? You can't do it. But plants, these perennial plants, they have a symbiotic relationship with some bacteria. So it's actually the bacteria that provides the acid, and then the plant provides the sugar, and they do an exchange. So the bacteria breaks up the rock, and then the plant root gets it from the bacteria, and then it goes and they draw it back up. So all of the minerals that we rely on for life, this is how they're mostly provided, is by, there's other ways too, but this is one of the main ways, is that the plants break up these rocks and they make those minerals available to the rest of us. So, and again, we can't do that on our own. We need these plants to do it for us. And then the third thing is just all of those roots are very, very complicated roots. It's like a matrix that holds the soil in place, like literally just holds it there. So that's what they do, and annuals can't do any of that. So every time you plant annuals, you're just destroying that. You're mining the soil, and you do that year after year, and it's just over, which is what we see around the world. And the areas of the world that have been doing agriculture the longest, you've probably, if you think about like Iraq, because we've had this terrible war going on forever. What do you think of? You think of like a desert essentially with rocks, right? And also all the people tend to be really short.
The reason it was called the Fertile Crescent is because it used to be a fertile crescent, right?
Well, nobody in their right mind would call this place the Fertile Crescent now, and that's exactly. Human-made. All of that desert was made by human activity. And in response to this ever-growing population on ever-shrinking soil, humans get smaller and smaller and smaller. And that's why if you go around the world, like I said, to the places where people have been doing this the longest, you will find very short humans, as compared to those of us who have had actual access to minerals in our diets and some animal fat. We're a foot taller than a lot of these people. It's not because we're different kinds of humans. It's because they're so nutritionally deficient on the diets that they're eating, which is mostly in that part of the world, like flatbread. That's it, or rice, and it's really horrible. Like it's just you're looking at generations of nutritional deficiency. And what's interesting is that, of course, when immigrants move to wealthier countries, places where we have access to better food and people have more money to buy it, you can see this. Like I've seen this in San Francisco. When I go there, you'll have like the grandparents who are very petite, and then the parents are sort of a little bit taller, but not dramatically so. And then you've got the kids who are, my age or maybe a little bit younger, who, it's been 2 generations now where they've had better food. And I mean, the guys are all 6 feet tall, and it's like they're literally a foot taller than their grandparents. And it's like you see the influence of nutrition just on what humans should be looking like.
Yeah.
We have enough proper nutrition. And it's right there for everyone to see, but are we putting the pieces together? So that's the piece, right? So then you have to have a military. So you have to be imperialist. And it really doesn't matter what kind of beautiful, peaceful religious values those people might hold. They might have the most lovely religion in the world, and like do beautiful art and make lovely music. And they all sit around and pray 5 times a day, or whatever, like really lovely rituals. It doesn't matter. The society is dependent on imperialism and genocide because you've got to conquer your neighbors. This is the problem. So we wrecked the planet, we wrecked our health, and we've also wrecked human society. We are stuck in these like endless, really horrible hierarchies,
Well, it sounds like what you're saying, or would you agree, agriculture led to money monetization, which led to corporate, structures and things like that. So we've destroyed the planet, and then we also have this money component. And so if we bring it back to like at the individual level, what advice would you give to someone that's trying to navigate the nutrition realm, and especially with the mainstream narrative? I would consider like the plant-based agenda like more a mainstream narrative. Like, what advice would you give to someone trying to figure that out and trying to navigate that?
It's hard. You need a good scientific background to understand why all the studies that purported to show that animal foods cause cancer, animal foods cause heart disease, like all of it is honestly bunk, shall we say. Like none of it actually adds up. They've never proven that cholesterol causes any problems for humans. They've certainly never proven that animal products cause cancer. I'm going to recommend a really good book, which will walk you through this, by a science writer, and that's Gary Taubes. And he's got a really great article that you can start with, that's called "What If It Was All a Big Fat Lie?"
Yeah,
and that
I remember reading that long
kicked
time
him
ago.
off into really, really examining this, because he saw like pretty quickly, because he had the science background to understand it. He's like, we've just been lied to here for a few decades. So he wrote a really big book, but it's like a thriller. I mean, it's such a good read. It's called Good Calories, Bad Calories. You can start there.
Love it too. Yeah.
It's a wonderful book. And if you're at all confused about this, or you want to confuse yourself more, go ahead and read that book, because by the end of it, you'll be done. I mean, he's got everything is absolutely footnoted. He walks you through all of it. If you have no biological background, no scientific background, that is the book that I think is the best one to make everybody understand how bad this is out there. Like this is just a vast experiment that they did on the American public, and it failed. It failed.
Absolutely,
you can look at photographs, even from the late 70s, how people looked. Go find any random photograph, even from your own family photos. How did people look in 1976? How did they look in 1980? Look at pictures from the boardwalk or the beach. They don't look like they do now. Yeah. And I'm not in any way trying to make people who have, are struggling with their weight feel bad. I know that half the people listening to this are going to feel awful about themselves when I say this, and I'm not intending that. This was done to you. Okay. This is not your fault. And there is a way out. There really is. You were lied to, you did what you were told, and it destroyed your body.
We all did. We all have a similar story. Like I came from, standard American process, trying to do the right thing, but it wasn't the right thing. I went vegan for 2 years, and I was, high blood pressure, pre-diabetic, the list went on, extremely overweight. But it sounds like what you're saying, if someone's trying to figure this out, it's useful to not get pigeonholed into something super dogmatic without trying to understand or learn or educate yourself on different perspectives, and maybe even experiment a little bit. That's what I've found to work really, really well with my clients and with myself in general, is not to just fall for something and believe in it just because, but maybe consider the possibility that there's some other ways of doing things, and give those things a shot to see how it feels. I don't know. Would you agree with that?
Keep a soft edge, not a hard edge.
Yes.
You can look through history and see that humans are more than capable of taking up really fundamentalist beliefs, and it never ends well.
Hmm.
And that to be an actual functioning adult, you need to stay engaged and you need to stay curious. Don't hold on to anything too tightly, because you may be wrong. And it may seem like the rightest thing in the world, but then it's wrong.
Yeah.
And I've had that experience enough now, and I've certainly paid a high enough price. I always try to remember that, keep the soft edge, not the hard edge, listen to the information. It will never hurt you to have a counter view. It will never hurt you. If you feel yourself like terrified of listening to a different opinion, you need to let that down. You need to bring that barrier down, stop being afraid, let the information in. If you grapple with it, you can decide.
Right.
Is this actually true? Do I think this is true? Okay, what other facts do I need to make up my mind? That's a great thing to do as an adult.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the other, maybe you're right. Maybe you have enough information to say, oh, this person is wrong. I can explain why. Great. Now you can be more solid in your beliefs. But the moment that you feel that fear when someone's trying to explain something to you, you're in a bad state. You're heading toward fundamentalism, and it's not going to end well for you.
Yeah. Or defensiveness. But also one thing that I've noticed about just intuiting from everything that I've read and listened to from you is that you're for people's choice to make a decision in whatever direction they want, whether it's how they eat or whatever, but it's an educated choice, and it's avoiding the extremes, right? And the problem is we haven't been given the right information for the past 50, 60 years. And maybe avoiding these extremes. And it's not that plants are bad or animals are bad. It's like they're all good. And there's something in the middle that we need to try to find for ourselves, right?
Well, it sort of depends on what health conditions you have. If you're somebody who's basically healthy, you can do a lot and you really won't feel any bad effects. Like, you'll bounce back. But I did that vegan thing for way too long. So at this point, I'm like way over on the other side where things just go crazy really quickly. So I've been eating carnivore for an entire year, and it is really, really
Good for
helpful.
you.
Yeah, no, it has dramatically helped my autoimmune stuff. So wow, I can bend my fingers. Look at that. So I'm really happy with that. But look into all of it before you make decisions and do experiments. Like, I was like, all right, I'll try it for 3 months. Did it help? Am I in less pain? I was like, I am definitely in less pain. So there's something to this. And I'm not like, I am a carnivore. I'm not doing that. Like, it's not my identity. I may decide tomorrow it's not working anymore. I may get better information that something else might work better. I'm willing to try it. Like, I'm not going to solidify this into something that, I can't question. And when I see that happening in some of these spaces, it's like, no, this is the wrong attitude. You want to invite people in. You want to explain what information you have, see what they know, see what they think. The moment that this becomes like another rigid kind of orthodoxy, it's over. Yeah. You can't. All you can do is try to offer people better information and see what they do with it.
So if you're supercharged about something, that should be like your mindfulness indicator to step back and maybe allow yourself.
Let it down a little bit. Like, you don't need to react that strongly to any of this. It's your body. It's your decision. You're the one going to the grocery store. You can decide whatever you want. You don't even have to tell anybody about it. Like, you're completely in control here. So the information is not the point where you need to have that kind of a boundary. It really isn't. And that's hard, especially for those of us who were vegan. We clearly have a psychological propensity to that kind of extremism. And that, I think, is just something to note about yourself, so that you can just kind of relax it a little bit as life goes on. You'll do better.
Yeah. So from a nutrition perspective, the advice would be, just educate yourself to the best of your abilities on different fronts, do some experiments, don't go too extreme in either direction. We've kind of talked about the sustainability environmental piece, and it doesn't sound like the modern industrialization of food in general, whether it's, plant-based or meat-based or anything in between, is really serving the planet in any way. But I think what we need to do first is get ourselves as healthy as possible so we can really figure out how to tackle that part of it. Right.
Yeah. And if we stop doing agriculture and let the world come back, if we let all those plants and animals come home, which they will do if we give them a choice about it, and very quickly, there's still so much hope that we could repair what has been destroyed. Every day, this is very grim. Every day on this planet, 200 species go extinct. So they're gone forever. And the reason we're doing that is because of agriculture. At the bottom of it all, that's the problem, is that, for whatever reason, and I have my theories about this, but for whatever reason, humans have decided that we're allowed to just take over entire chunks of land and not let anything else live there, and just keep doing that until it's all gone. not a plan with a future, because we are, as I said, we were out of topsoil and we're now eating oil. That also is going to run out. I mean, it doesn't reproduce. So the day is going to come when we don't have nitrogen for that either. So that's going to be a really hard landing for the human race. That's going to be a collapse like we've never seen before. I would prefer that we have a gentle landing, which means all of us need to understand what the destruction is. And we need to stop doing it. We need to stop doing agriculture. If we let the grasses come home, they need their ruminant cohort to really be who they are. This is true for all of us, right? We are all part of a community and we all play a role. So the way that ruminants and grasses work together is pretty extraordinary. It's really an amazing cycle that they make together, but you can't have one without the other. But I will say that if we were to repair even 80% of the world's grasslands that have been destroyed by agriculture, if we were to let the grasses come back, it would only take about 12 years. We could sequester all the carbon that's been released since the beginning of the industrial age. So that would be year 1800. We would be back down to that level, because that's what ruminants and grasses do. They build soil, and the basic building block is carbon. And where they're going to get that carbon is from the atmosphere. So they can do it. We don't need any of this like crazy, insane sci-fi technology, which is, I mean, that stuff is just nuts. The kinds of things that people are proposing we do. We don't need it. All we need to do is let life come back, and it can still solve this mess that we've made. So we need everybody on the planet to understand this. We need them to really venerate the ruminants and the grasses as a biome, as a biological community. We have a role to play in this too. If ruminants don't have predators, they don't behave well either. So we need wolves and we need grizzly bears and we need humans behaving the way that we behave as apex predators.
Yeah. Because
ruminants have to be tightly bunched and quickly moving for the grasses to be okay. If they're just let to just do whatever they want, they will overgraze and destroy the place. They need us to do that for them. So humans can do it, wolves can do it, lions can do it, bears can do it, apex predators, whoever you are, we need you back. So we need to stop fighting a war with them too. And then everything it will happen very quickly. I don't think it would be that I can see the end of it. This is not like 2,000 years from now. This is like within my lifetime, we could do this, but it means we need to stop living in certain ways. And we need to accept that. We need to accept this was a very bad idea, but we will be way healthier because the food that comes from those animals, what do you know, matches exactly the needs of the human template. Yeah. Because we evolved on the African savanna hunting those large ruminants. That's literally what made us human. Of course, that's the perfect food for humans. It's what made us human, was eating those animals. So we would have those animals again. The animals in factory farms, not only are they miserable, but everything is wrong. The amino acid profile is wrong. The fatty acid profile is wrong. You can still get sick eating those animals because they're not right. And of course, they're miserable. So like everybody can admit, like that's just a very bad idea. So we'll just put factory farming aside because we all know it sucks. But what we need to do is restore. We need to repair and restore, and then finally just rejoin. We need to stop being dominators of the planet and just be another community member, which is what we were for 2 million years. We know how to do this. Like it's in our blood, it's in our bones. It's there, it's in our spiritual longings. We know how to do it. We just have to start doing it again.
Yeah. So if I hear you right, it sounds like connecting to the best of your abilities, as you're trying to figure out what you feel is healthiest for you, connecting with your local community. Sounds a lot like the regenerative movement where you have the cattle that graze and then they move and the chickens come behind it and they plant gardens and they're rotating crops and things like that. So trying to find a way to connect with food sources that are in that direction.
And there's 2 really good resources for that. One is there's a website called eatwild.com.
Oh, I love it. Yeah.
Yeah. That's Jo Robinson. She's written some good books too. We'll walk you through all of this, like in very plain English, but you can go to her website and click on anywhere that you live and it will show you who in your region makes the really good food that's building topsoil. That's all grass-based. And that's an amazing thing. The more of that food you can buy, the better off we're all going to be, including my dog. So this is Jamie, the Great Pyrenees. And then the other one, of course, is Weston Price. They have a lot of great resources to get good food in your region as well. So
yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that we covered the majority of the questions that I had sent you and wanted to ask you in some way or another. Would you agree with that? Is there anything that we didn't touch on that we felt like was really important to discuss?
I think we're good.
I think I'm trying to pull it up here. Sage had expressed that there was a little bit of confusion. I think it was more so when you guys were it might have been when Lierre was talking about her garden, but
Mhm.
Sage just said she was confused. She has an allotment with a wildlife garden, cut flowers, etc., and some fruit and vegetable plants, which are just covered with netting and other things, etc. I use companion planting to reduce insects on certain vegetable patches,
That's
but
great.
I have
Mhm.
other patches for animals to eat too, and the insects and the pollinators, etc. So for human animals and other animals, no use of pesticides, etc.
No, I mean, if you're going to grow a garden, absolutely, companion planting is a good way to go.
It's like
Anything that
permaculture
you
or
can
something.
do to reduce, absolutely toxic chemicals that never should have been invented, I think is a great thing. So, more power to you. It can be very effective, yeah. And, hand picking stuff that happens as well. But, that means really getting involved. They're not going to do that on vast plots in, the Central Valley of California, where it's, 25 miles straight of just tomatoes. That's not going to happen. So, yeah. The Central
Cool.
Valley, I will say, by the way, at one point there were water birds there so thick that they blocked out the sun. That's how many birds were there, and they're all gone. And that's what
Wow,
agriculture is.
that's
Because
crazy.
we took all that land and we took all that water, and there is now nowhere for the birds to go. So case in point, that's what agriculture is.
I'm just floored by just the conversation that happened here. This is, I'm really astounded by just a shift in philosophy. It started out protecting the animals, and then it just broadened and blossomed into restoring the ecosystem. That is a great message in itself, Lierre. I love it.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, and you gotta, so just to make a plug for, the vegetarian myth, obviously, I would think if you haven't read that, it's a must read. It's foundational. I'm finishing up Bright Green Lines, which you're co-author on, right, Lierre?
Yeah, there were two, Derek Jensen and Max Wilbert. So the three of
Okay.
us.
Absolutely. Like I'm going back and rereading it because there's so many great quotes in there that I'm just like, did they come up with every single one of these original quotes? Because they're just, it's such a good read.
Thank you.
How else can we support you, or what else do you have going on? Is there
You can go to my website, which is very, very behind. My website is it needs updating very badly, but you can still go there. All my books are there, and I do try to put up if I'm going to be doing like a public talk or anything, you can maybe find that. I'm on Twitter now. You can go to Twitter, or my Facebook page is another good one. I try to keep anything that if I'm doing something public, I'll make it a public post so you can see if I'm going to be talking or speaking or doing something. I have classes too sometimes. So if you want to do like a writing class or some other, I was thinking about doing a class for recovering vegans as well. Cause I mean, I just get so many messages from people that are struggling with this. I think somebody might enjoy that, but I
I
haven't
was
put
going
it
to say
together yet, but I'm
you have
thinking
to
about
get
it.
a ton of messages from people after reading your book,
Yeah.
like thinking, wow.
It's really hard. I've been there, like I know exactly what they're suffering. And I just try to be super kind and hold their hands a little bit. Like it will get easier, I promise. I mean, the first year is really hard, but you will feel better. It's hard. It's really
Yeah.
hard.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So Lierre, thank you so much. I think you are an absolute gem. And like I said, like I'm absolutely starstruck. I'm so thankful that you spent this time and shared this time with us today.
Well, thank you.
And I'm going to compile some really good show notes and make sure that people connect with you. And just from a personal perspective, highly recommend reading The Vegetarian Myth. No matter what your belief system is, you need to educate yourself on all sides. I'm telling you, it is a foundational book. Bright Green Lines, I absolutely love. A little bit more about the planet. Thank you so much, Lierre, and thank you everybody who attended today. Thank you for your participation. Love you guys so much.
Thank you, everyone.